Fáilte. Welcome to the Village Oak Tree. I'm your host, Terrance Ó Domhnaill. Thank you for joining me again this week. I have something a little more personal to talk about this week. I want to talk about the declining veterans healthcare services those of us who gave a portion of our lives are supposed to be receiving from our veterans hospitals. As some of you may remember me saying before, I'm a military veteran who gave up close to 25 years of my life in military service to the United States. In the course of multiple deployments and countless training exercises that kept me from coming home at night, I got pretty banged up along the way, like a lot of us have. So gather around, sit you down somewhere comfortable for a bit while I talk about a recent encounter with my local Veterans Administration hospital and the overall picture of a declining empire that still wants our young people to fight for them, but has now decided not to take care of us like they promised. About 22 years ago, I finished my long military career and transitioned from going to military hospitals, clinics, and battlefield medics to the VA hospital system for my medical needs. The VA healthcare system is supposed to take care of us for our service-connected medical issues, such as exposures, physical damage to our bodies, and mental health issues incurred while on active duty. Those service-connected issues are required to have been documented either while on active duty or within 2 years after leaving active duty. And that's where they get us, especially those of us who made a career out of the military. Like most soldiers, I out-processed into retirement when it was time, and during that processing, I was subjected to an intensive physical to document all my injuries and maladies as per my military medical records and interviews with VA medical staff conducting the review. What they don't tell you about are the long-term effects of exposures to hazardous chemicals, toxic food, water, and air while we served our country. Most people think that all of this stems from our overseas deployments to various battle zones, especially in the Middle East, and while technically correct, we have been exposed to toxic poisons right here at home in the United States as well. Camp Lejeune in North Carolina is just one example that made the news in recent years. I have a dear friend living in New England who was stationed there as a Marine, and he's been disabled with several maladies due to his time there. A lot of children died there from the toxic water at the from living on post housing for decades that the American government covered up until they couldn't anymore, mostly because of the easy access to the internet. The stories finally made it out into the public, and the government couldn't cover it up anymore. That's just one glaring example, but there are many more military bases around the United States with infrastructure issues that harm military personnel over the years, going back over a century. One of the earliest I read about was how Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States, he deliberately downplayed the Spanish flu epidemic taking place, and thousands of American soldiers died during his term of the flu, both at home and in the trenches of World War I. Military housing at bases around the U.S. is notorious for being built from cheap, toxic materials that have hurt and killed people for decades. There have been mold and mildew issues, with poisonous fumes coming from the materials used to build these structures for years that the government tried to cover up as much as possible, until the advent of the internet and social media. I myself have been exposed to asbestos, toxic smoke and fumes, toxic chemicals, radiological waste at overseas installations, and who knows for sure what me and my family may have been exposed to while living in government quarters around the country during all those years. What the government doesn't want you to know, or doesn't want anyone to know, is that with most of these toxic exposures, it sometimes takes years before the symptoms start showing up in our bodies. But because we didn't report them within the 2-year window after leaving military service, the VA tries hard to deny disability claims and health care at the VA hospitals. That's all part of the scam to get out of taking care of us later on after we've been out of the military for a while. I have fought for years to get the VA to document everything that showed up in my body long after that 2-year window. They finally acknowledged that I may have been exposed to Agent Orange in 1974, asbestos in the 1970s, toxic chemicals while performing my duties as an engineering technician through the years, and later on while deployed to the Persian Gulf during Desert Storm, exposure to sarin gas, oil smoke from the burning oil wells. Then later on in life, as an Army reservist, I was exposed to nuclear waste at an old Russian air base in Uzbekistan. Some of you veterans may be familiar with the base we call K2 or Karshi Kanabat. Not to mention all the unsanitary living conditions while living in Kunduz, Afghanistan for 10 months. Now, after a lot of pushing, I'm on nearly every watch list for cancers related to all my exposures. Not that that will help me in the long run, but it gives me a little leverage as things start to crop up, like my recent bout with a little skin cancer, which they cut out of me. Along with all these exposures is the physical damage that years of wearing wrong sized military footgear did to a lot of us. Years of daily physical training and jumping out of aircraft with parachutes and sometimes without parachutes, such as jumping from hovering helos onto hard surfaces, did to our bones and ligaments. Something I've been fighting since before I left active duty, and is now manifesting itself in osteoarthritis, which a lot of older, very active people are familiar with. I was diagnosed with this when I went through my out processing physical at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, back in late 2004. They told me it was a natural ailment that most physically active military members suffer from, and that it would continue to get worse as we aged. There is no cure, but the VA would try to help ease the pain and discomfort now that they had documented it in my new VA medical records. You remember, this is back in 2004. What a lie. 10 years after I left active duty, I started experiencing a lot of pain in my right knee and hands, especially my right hand, my primary. I was told that my knee issues were a result of my physically active lifestyle. At that time, I was an avid hiker, snow skier, and snowshoer back then, plus my work was also very physical, my civilian work. And not a result of my active duty injuries and exposures, because I never reported it within the 2-year window I told you about. They would provide medical care grudgingly, but I couldn't file a claim. I told them I could care less about any disability claims. I just wanted relief from the pain. So my VA primary care doctor at the time referred me to an orthopedist, who x-rayed and MRI'd me, then told me that my knee was pretty tore up and that I needed a knee replacement surgery. The VA wouldn't cover it because I couldn't prove that I had injured it while I was on active duty, although I pointed out all of the osteoarthritis that was creeping through every joint of mine below the waist from my military service. They said that didn't count. So I've been living with a bum knee for over 12 years now because the VA doesn't want to recognize that ligaments and joint issues deteriorating due to excessive wear and tear during active duty counts as service-connected. That hasn't stopped them from treating my knee symptoms over the years, but they certainly aren't in any hurry to see me when something happens. Case in point, about 2 weeks ago, knowing my knees are in bad shape, I carefully went around the outside of my house using a ladder to clean out my rain gutters ahead of the next batch of storms. The next night, I experienced excruciating pain in my right knee as I was getting up off the sofa to go to bed. I figured I'd be okay the next morning. Not so much. I noticed some swelling, numbness and thought that can't be good. I waited one more day, emailed my VA primary care clinic with the details, and they asked for an appointment to see my physician. No response, other than my emails being forwarded to my provider. I waited until the following Monday and made a phone call to the triage nurse station and explained my situation. She tried to call the clinic, and no one would answer the phone on a Monday afternoon. She advised me to go to an in-network VA urgent care facility out in the community to get seen and to sign release forms for the VA. Me being a good soldier, followed orders, and I went to the nearest urgent care off the list she sent me. That went fairly well, all things considered, but when I tried to inform somebody at the VA hospital what I had done, I couldn't get anyone to answer the phone or respond to emails using this secure VA email system they told us to use whenever possible. This went on for 2 days. I finally got frustrated after a VA nurse passively advised me in an email to go to a civilian provider and use my private health care insurance, which for me is Medicare and TRICARE for life due to my age. I made a phone call and set up an appointment for the next day, which was last Friday morning. As soon as I hung up the phone, The VA clinic called and I explained what was going on. She told me that a nurse would be calling me very soon. They never did. On Friday, I had two doctor's appointments, one with this new orthopedist, the civilian one, and one in the afternoon at the VA hospital for another service-connected issue I've been fighting with the VA for years. By the time I finished with the orthopedist and returned home for lunch before heading out to my other appointment, I still hadn't heard from the VA. That afternoon, I reported from my appointment, and while there, I learned that I had a consult in the VA system for the VA orthopedics department and an appointment to see my primary care provider. I explained to the admin clerk at the orthopedics clinic that I had just learned about all this from other people that afternoon, and that I had brought the report and x-rays from my urgent care visit the previous Monday. They were happy that I had the foresight to do that and gave me an appointment for right after my next one with my primary care provider, which is this afternoon, actually. By this time, it has now been 2 weeks, and what is looking like a bunch of torn ligaments, another soft tissue damage to my right knee, most likely caused by it being weak to begin with all these years, and it finally gave way. Am I going to suffer from permanent damage because I couldn't get a VA doctor to examine me in a timely fashion? Maybe. Will I require some kind of knee surgery now? Most likely. I offer you my own personal experience with the VA healthcare system to show everyone that free medical care is not free at all. We pay with our lives on the line as they withhold timely care that could save us from serious harm or even death. There have been thousands of Vietnam War veterans who died before getting the care they needed from the cancers that defoliant caused. We all heard about Agent Orange. It took years before the VA finally acknowledged that exposure was causing cancers. And even after that, they denied claims and service to Air Force personnel who loaded that stuff into planes in places like Thailand and other bases outside of Vietnam during the war, which included the blue water sailors off the Vietnam coast, the riverboat sailors, and so on, which I was one of those. Then there was all of the claims for symptoms from deployments to the deserts in Kuwait and Iraq during the first Gulf War. The doctor spent years documenting, scratching their heads over finding the cause, blaming soldiers for faking their symptoms and making up stuff to justify something. Then a few years ago, I came across an obscure news article about how Saddam Hussein had dumped sarin gas out in the deserts of northern territories of Kuwait and southern Iraq so he could claim that he didn't have any chemical weapons of mass destruction. Once those chemicals dehydrated in the intense sun, the toxic dust was picked up by the wind currents and dumped all over the desert areas where the American soldiers and sailors were operating, me being one of them in 1992. This article said that the symptoms of sarin gas exposure were a near perfect match to most of what those sailors and soldiers and airmen reported in Gulf War symptoms and their complaints as they were done. Did the VA admit this? No. They still deny that they were exposed and turned down our claims. Another Agent Orange style denial. Then there is a report about the old Russian air base at Karshi-Kanabad of Uzbekistan. There were a lot of Air Force personnel and Army engineers who became sick from radiation sickness, but it took years before the VA and the Pentagon finally admitted that the Russians had dumped nuclear waste at that base and it was killing people. Of course, they did their best to cover it up as usual. Try to get those they identified as having been stationed there into the VA hospitals and ordering everyone to keep it as quiet as possible. For those of us who pass through where they're on our way to other places at theater, sorry, Charlie. Unless you manifest any of the prescribed symptoms of radiation poisoning, too bad if you get radiation-related cancers later in life. They're not service-connected, according to the VA. And I was there for 3 weeks. Like my service allergic reaction to, my service-connected allergic reaction to the malaria antibiotic they made us take while on deployments to third world countries. I now have a permanent documented disability from that severely toxic medicine, but the VA didn't want to admit that they had made a mistake by giving it to us, even though they knew how dangerous it was. The government had known for decades, but chose to ignore the well-documented warnings. After so many military personnel had severe allergic reactions, and permanent nerve damage from this stuff, the government finally put a black box warning on it in 2013, which was too late for those of us who suffer permanent nerve damage, me being one of them. To this day, the VA refuses to acknowledge that Lariam or methicillin malaria antibiotic caused some of us permanent nerve damage. They blamed our symptoms on other things, such as severe PTSD and breathing issues caused by something else. You see a pattern here? Since World War II in Korea, the U.S. government has maintained a pattern of denial regarding some of the more egregious things they've done to us through the years. Sometimes I wonder what the death toll from all this friendly fire is compared to actually killed in action by enemy fire statistics. How many thousands of U.S. military service members have died from service-connected exposures and mistakes made by higher-ups that they decided to cover up, rather than admit they made a mistake and make the effort to take care of us? Many of you listening to this podcast or reading the commentary know of a veteran who is or is suffering from some service-connected disability that they have to fight the VA for to even get the minimal care they've been promised by the government. I know I'm one of those. I know of quite a few personally myself that I've met through the years, and I've read stories of a lot more. One of the things I've noticed over the last couple of years since Trump took office is a quiet dwindling of doctors and nurses at my local VA hospital where I live. If it's happening here, I'm sure it's happening all around the country. We've heard stories about rural hospitals and clinics having to close up because the money ran out. I'm also beginning to believe that the same thing is happening to the VA hospitals and clinics around the country as well. Not so much closing up in this case, but less federal money to operate on and pay salaries for good quality doctors and nurses. My local hospital looks fairly empty now whenever I go there for an appointment. There are still a lot of veterans there, but the amount of doctors and nurses seems to be a lot less than it used to be back in 2024. The majority of the doctors are foreign-born are working on their residencies so they can move on to a better paying gig at a civilian hospital somewhere else. There are a lot fewer nurses there for sure. There's a lot more administrative staff there than actual healthcare providers now, which may explain why I can't contact anyone there anymore to make appointments, unless I want to fight hard to make one. It shouldn't be like that. It didn't used to be like that before Trump. I'm interested in hearing from other veterans who want to talk about their experiences with the VA healthcare system here lately. Has anything changed where you live since Trump started stealing as much taxpayer money as he thinks he can get away with? I often wonder what the new generation of young veterans are going to have to deal with when it's their turn to sign up for VA healthcare someday. Will they even still have VA healthcare after Trump ruins the economy? Some things to ponder as I take my break. I'll be back in a minute or two to wrap things up. I've got a kind of a story for you from a British writer that I came across. It's a horror story. It's short though, and I'll read it to you after the break. I want to take this time to show you my book, tell you what the story is about, and explain how you can get one to read. By 2031, the American experiment has failed. A theocratic coup has transformed the United States into an authoritarian state. White Christian nationalists control the government. Millions of non-white immigrants and citizens have been forced into labor camps or driven into exile. The Constitution is void. The economy has collapsed. And the country that once promised freedom now hunts anyone who remembers what that word meant. Dr. James Naismith is a ghost in this new America. He's Pakistani American, Muslim, and on the run with a bounty on his head. James practices medicine illegally for the underground resistance and those on the run, treating fugitives as rebels and anyone else the regime has designated undesirable in this new country. His medical kit is contraband. His patients are criminals. His survival depends on staying invisible. But Dr. James isn't running to save himself. His two younger sisters have been incarcerated in a labor camp, and every mile brings him closer to rescuing them and escaping across the border, if they're still alive. While working in New York City, an unexpected reunion changes everything. Deanna, a woman from his recent past, offers him more than shelter and supplies for a night. She has connections with the underground, survival skills, and some military training learned from her father and brothers. With their skills and knowledge, she leads the escape from Homeland Security across upper New England towards a safe haven through dangerous territory in a fractured nation, igniting a simmering romance along the way. Together, they navigate a landscape of betrayal and surveillance, where allies can become enemies and every decision may have fatal consequences. The federal police are hunting them. The resistance network is fragmented, and the journey to safety may cost Jay more than his freedom. It may cost him his sisters. The powerful vision of democracy's collapse and one man's fight for family, faith, and a future worth living. A new, very possible future begins in Book 1, Fugitives in the United States. The rescue mission continues in Book 2, The Camps. Hopefully we'll be out by early next year. This is a story for the times we now live in. You can get a copy through the many options I have available in the online store at credibatha.com. Online store, you can go through the website address with the QR code or on the banner at the bottom. I sell copies directly from the store, which ship out as soon as the order comes in, or with links to online retailers such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Ingram Spark, if you're okay with print to order. There are also many ebook distributors across the world where this book is sold as well. So go find yourself a copy and order one today. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Sláinte. All right, welcome back. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to share this story here on the screen. Let me get it pulled up here. All right, so what I'm going to do, like I usually do, I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to slide over here and read it. This is from Martin Morrison. He's a friend of mine from Yorkshire, England. And this is a horror story called A Work of Art, Her Most Original Idea. Okay, Sammy, what's the surprise? Where are we going? Paul asked as the bus chugged down the main road to the city center. Remember that art exhibition I told you about? Sammy reminded him. Oh yeah, you got the gig? Paul chirped. You sure did. The launch is tomorrow, Sammy said with a smile. Oh wow, Paul exclaimed. That's fantastic news. Congratulations. Tomorrow, you said. So where are we off to now? Well, I haven't quite finished setting it up yet, she explained, and I was hoping you'd help me with the last piece. I'd be delighted to. Be an honor. Is it something heavy? Paul asked. Something like that, she replied. I could definitely do with your help. You know what? Paul and Sammy had been hanging out together for long. Hadn't been hanging out for long, and he was still trying to figure out where he stood. She seemed happy for him to pursue her, and he didn't feel as though he'd been nudged into friend zone. Being invited to help her with their exhibition sounded like a significant step in the right direction. That said, Samantha Weatherspoon had already stirred up attention for her controversial approach to art, and it wasn't all good. For every fan who loved her work, someone else wanted to burn her at the stake for heresy. Overthinking things, as young people sometimes do when they're attracted to someone, there were two ways he could look at this trip to the gallery. He hoped it was a signal that he was someone she was considering for more than friendship, a man she could trust and have around in different situations. On the other hand, she could be grooming him to be her gopher for as long as he remained interested. For the rest of the ride, they chatted about the exhibition and Sammy's aspirations, Paul showing as much interest as he could as Sammy shared her vision. Here goes, Sammy said, reaching for the bell to ask the driver to stop. Williamson Square. Next stop, Johns Williams Gallery. The pair alighted from the bus and made their way across the square to the gallery, a grand neoclassic building. The group of pigeons that had congregated in the center of the square scattered as the two bohemians marched them through them, Sammy in stunning red coat that perfectly matched her magnificent flame-colored hair cascading down her shoulders, Paul in a tweed three-quarter-length coat and matching beret. They bounded up the steps together through the glass doors, ladies first, and walked into a spacious hall with a checkered tile floor. There was a small cafe in the center of the hall where art lovers could enjoy espresso and appreciate the massive framed pictures mounted on the stairways. Everything about the Johns William Gallery was majestic. Sammy led Paul up the stairs. Come, she beckoned with a glint in her eye. It's time for your surprise. My surprise? Oh, yes, she enthused. Unforgettable, Paul. This is something you will remember for the rest of your life. They reached the first floor, and Sammy ran towards one of the rooms. Ready, she teased, placing her hand on the handle of one of the double doors. Before Paul could respond, she flung open the door as though whipping away a sheet for a big reveal. Oh, wow, Sammy, Paul said. She's sincerely amazed. He hadn't seen her work before. As repulsed as some people were, he was mesmerized. The images on the wall were mostly abstract and otherworldly, but it was her lifelike models that pulled most of his attention. Directly in front of them, as they entered the large room, stood a tall statue of a beautiful young woman. Paul approached and slowly circled the figure. The back of the statue had been cut away, displaying a realistic set of internal organs. She could almost be an exhibit in a high school biology class. He was reminded of Damien Hirst's mother in Child Peace that had caused so much controversy 2 decades earlier. Carefully placed around the room were other equally disturbing statues. As Paul paced around the space, becoming so lost in experience that he had forgotten he wasn't alone, Sammy's gaze followed him. She cleared her throat and, without a word, started walking towards the corner of the room with her back to her companion. Paul followed, walking a little more briskly to catch up to where Sammy had stopped. The last piece, Paul announced. Where's the artwork? In front of them was a 6-foot squared space framed with red rope and a "Do Not Cross" sign. To the right of where the exhibit should be, at eye level, was a small white framed note with a description of the piece. Sammy pointed to it. Here's the surprise. Paul looked closely at the sign and let out a short snigger. Boyfriend, he said quietly. Shall I step over the rope and enter the forbidden area? He asked, stepping into the space as he spoke. Sammy skipped over the barrier with him. Paul surrendered to the moment, sensing that he didn't need to act. Sammy would direct events from here. She squared up to him, locking her eyes with his. As her face came closer to his, he raised his right hand to caress her hair. Her lips were so close, he could feel her breath, and his heart raced. His eyes closed, their lips touched. At least for Paul, the world stopped turning just for a moment. Thud! The impact brought Paul back to the gallery, and he opened his eyes wide. Before he could process what was happening, he felt another blow to his left kidney, then another and another. Sammy took a step back, staring at the dying man in front of her as though he were a freshly painted canvas, emotionless. As the pain started to kick in, and the feeling of damp warmth oozed from the wounds in his back, Paul looked into the eyes of his killer. He tried to speak, but it was as though he were paralyzed. Sapped of energy, it took everything he had to remain standing. Sammy lunged forward, thrusting the blade into his neck. Blood sprayed all over her, speckling her face. She opened her mouth like someone gasping for breath under a hot shower, bathing in her handiwork. Paul collapsed in a heap in the middle of the sealed area. Regaining her composure, Sammy calmly wiped the knife on the sleeve of her coat, closed it, and put it back in her pocket. She stepped over the rope and turned to face her last creation. Her mission was almost accomplished. What have you done? What have you done? Gasped a staff member from the other side of the echoey room. I'm calling the police. Sammy was unflustered. She aimed her phone at the body on the floor and took the shot. A work of art. This is from Martin Morrison, British writer. So that's a pretty good horror story. Like I said, I thought it would be interesting to give you a change of pace. Gora Mahagat, thank you for watching or listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed it, and you'll return again to listen to me offer a voice to what a lot of people are thinking these days, in this case, mostly veterans. To say goodbye this week, I'll leave you with this thought. If you're a veteran out there and you're listening to this, you need to fight hard to get your veterans benefits that they promised us. I know I fight hard almost every week, every month, to get them to take care of me for all the bad things they did while I was on active duty. And all of you who listen to this need to do the same. So get out there, get your benefits like they promised us, and don't let them tell you no. So I'll say goodbye for now. Slán go foill.